My daughter threw me out of her house after her husband lied to her that he overheard me tell someone on phone that I owned the house she built. I tried to explain to her, but she didn't listen to me. She said, "Mom warned me about hosting you, but I thought she wasn't being honest. Go and don't return. You can forget about my existence." What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. The day my daughter told me to forget she existed, the sky was so clear it almost felt like mockery. That piercing, empty blue stretched out overhead like there wasn't a storm happening inside my chest. I stood on her porch with my duffel bag in hand, a canvas one I'd kept since the 80s, and the words she'd just hurled at me still echoed in my ears. "Mom warned me about hosting you, but I thought she wasn't being honest. Go and don't return. You can forget about my existence." She said it with the sharp finality of someone cutting a rope clean in two. No tears, no hesitation, just a verdict passed with cold, practiced detachment. The same mouth that once called me daddy with sticky fingers and wide eyes now sealed the door on whatever history we had. And I stood there, suddenly 62 years old and completely unwanted. It had only been 3 weeks since I lost my job, a part-time maintenance position at a school where they decided they no longer had the budget to keep me on. The apartment I'd rented for 12 years had been sold off to a developer, and I didn't have the savings to keep up with the new rent. I called Clarissa, not with desperation, but with quiet hope. She had just finished building a new house with her husband, Derek, a shiny 2-story with those gray bricks that always looked cold, even in sunlight. She sounded hesitant on the phone, but she said, "Of course, Dad," for a while. And that was enough for me to pack up what little I had left and catch the next bus to her city. I didn't expect red carpets, but I didn't expect betrayal either. From the beginning, Derek treated me like I was radioactive. He walked around his own house like he had to remind everyone who paid the mortgage, like letting me use the downstairs guest room was some great sacrifice. I tried to be invisible, made my bed every morning, cleaned up after myself, and never touched anything that didn't belong to me. I even fixed a leaking pipe under their kitchen sink without being asked. No thank yous, of course. Just a sarcastic, "Guess it's good for something having a handyman around." I swallowed it, the way I'd swallowed years of hard work and disappointment. I told myself I was a guest, and a guest doesn't stir the pot. Then came the accusation. Derek claimed he overheard me on the phone, telling someone I owned their house, that I'd said I let my daughter and her husband live in it. I was stunned. I hadn't even spoken to anyone on the phone since arriving, unless you count the 5-minute call I made to Leon, an old friend, checking in to say I was doing all right. And even then, we'd only talked about football and bad knees. I told Clarissa this. I looked her in the eye and said, "That's a lie, sweetheart. I never said anything like that." But her face was already closed off. Not angry, just finished. Like she'd been waiting for a reason, and Derek handed it to her on a silver platter. Her voice cracked just once when she said, "I didn't want to believe it. But Mom always told me you had a way of making people feel like they owed you, that you'd find your way into their lives, and then make yourself a victim." I didn't even know how to respond. I wanted to ask her when I'd ever guilt her into anything, when I'd ever leaned on her for more than a damn phone call. But she was already backing away, her arms folded like she needed to protect herself from me. Me, the man who raised her after her mother passed away, who stayed up nights holding her while she cried over boys and heartbreaks, who worked double shifts just to make sure she could go to the dance in that overpriced blue dress she wanted so badly. I didn't cry. Not on the porch, not when the doors slammed behind me, and not when I sat on the curb waiting for a cab that never came. But something inside me cracked, slow and deep, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. The worst part wasn't the homelessness or the humiliation. It was knowing that my daughter saw me the way a stranger might. As a burden, as a threat, as a liar. All because her husband, a man who couldn't fix a damn smoke detector, decided to stir trouble, and she let him. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. My pride wouldn't let me beg. I walked for nearly an hour, carrying my bag and trying to ignore the looks people gave me. An old man with sunburned hands and a sagging duffel. People assumed things. I passed a bus stop, a closed hardware store, and a playground that reminded me of when Clarissa was 6, always asking to go one more time down the slide. Every memory was a blade. I thought about calling Leon again, but hesitated. We hadn't spoken much since his wife passed. I hated the idea of being a burden again, even to him. But eventually, with my feet blistering and nowhere else to turn, I dialed. Leon answered on the second ring, voice gravelly with sleep or beer. "Ray? That you?" I cleared my throat. "Yeah. Sorry to bother you. Just things didn't work out at Clarissa's." There was a pause. Then, "Say no more. You need a place to crash. My garage is open. It ain't much, but it's dry. You want it, it's yours." I closed my eyes. That offer, made without conditions or judgment, hit me harder than Clarissa's rejection. I swallowed the lump in my throat and muttered, "Thank you. That means more than you know." He chuckled. "Don't get sappy. I got a recliner out there and a mini fridge. You'll survive." That night, I lay curled up under an old wool blanket in Leon's garage, surrounded by tools, rusted bike parts, and the faint smell of motor oil. I stared up at the exposed beams in the ceiling and felt the weight of 62 years pressing down on my ribs. My daughter had thrown me out like garbage. But I wasn't garbage. I was still a man, still a father, still breathing. And somehow, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of something else. The first night in Leon's garage, I didn't sleep much. The concrete floor held the day's chill, seeping through the thin blanket he'd given me. Every sound, the hum of a streetlight outside, the drip of a leaky pipe, the shuffle of a raccoon near the trash bin, echoed through the hollow space. I lay on that recliner he'd dragged in from the corner, staring at the ceiling where the shadows of his tools hung like silent witnesses. It smelled of oil, dust, and faintly of old beer, the scent of men who had given up on certain things but hadn't yet surrendered entirely. I thought about how quickly my life had turned from modest comfort to borrowed space, and I wondered if maybe this was what getting old meant. Slowly being erased from the places you once belonged. Leon wasn't one for pity, which was exactly what I needed. In the morning, he brewed coffee in an old percolator that hissed and spat like it resented the effort. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry into what happened with Clarissa, just handed me a mug and said, "It's bitter, but it's hot." That was his way of saying he cared. We sat outside on overturned crates, watching the neighborhood wake up. The sun glinted off the hood of a beat-up Ford, and for a second, I remembered all those early mornings I'd spent driving to work, tools in the back seat, humming to myself, proud that I could provide for my family. I'd built a life out of sweat and scraped knuckles. Now, sitting beside Leon with nothing but a bag of clothes and a bruised heart, it all felt like a story that had happened to someone else. The days bled together. Leon's garage became a strange kind of refuge, a place where no one judged and silence didn't sting. I swept the floor, fixed his broken drill press, and reorganized his shelves just to feel useful. Every night, I'd heat a can of soup over a small camping stove he'd found for me. There was something grounding about it, almost humbling. I had time to think. Too much time, maybe. I thought about Clarissa's words, the venom in her voice when she said, "You can forget about my existence." She'd inherited her mother's tone when angry, calm, precise, and cutting. I wondered what her mother would have thought of this, of her only daughter turning away the man who once walked her to kindergarten and carried her on his shoulders when her legs got tired. The more I thought, the heavier my chest felt, but I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Betrayal hurts worst when it comes from love. By the second week, I started walking around town during the day just to clear my head. I'd pick up discarded receipts, newspapers, little bits of other people's lives that still had purpose. One afternoon, I found a crumpled lottery ticket near a convenience store. It was half soaked from the rain, but I pocketed it out of habit. I'd been buying one every week for years, a small ritual I never told anyone about. Something to remind me that maybe luck wasn't finished with me yet. That night, I dug through my duffel bag and found the last ticket I'd bought before moving in with Clarissa. I'd tucked it in between some old receipts and a photo of her as a little girl holding a sparkler. For no real reason, I turned on the small TV Leon kept in the corner and watched the lottery draw. The numbers rolled across the screen slowly, almost lazily. I remember whispering the first 3 digits out loud, my voice trembling as I compared them to my ticket. Then the fourth matched, then the fifth, and when the sixth and final number appeared, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and panic. I stared at the ticket for what felt like forever. I even turned it over, thinking maybe I'd misread something, that maybe the ink was smudged. But it wasn't. I had won. Not millions, but enough. Enough to start over, to have something that was mine again. I sat there laughing quietly, the sound breaking through the stillness like something sacred. Leon came in, puzzled, and asked, "What's funny?" I handed him the ticket without a word. When he realized what it meant, he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Looks like the world finally threw you a bone." I didn't jump or shout. I didn't even smile much. I just felt this strange, deep calm wash over me. Like the universe had seen me sleeping in that cold garage and decided I'd suffered enough. Leon clapped me on the shoulder and said, "So what now? You gonna disappear on me?" I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to rebuild. But this time, I'm doing it my way." And I meant it. I'd been living other people's versions of my life for too long. Bosses, neighbors, even my daughter. It was time to live for myself. Over the next few days, I claimed the winnings quietly. I didn't tell Clarissa. Didn't tell anyone except Leon. I moved out of his garage with a simple handshake and a promise that I'd always owe him one. I found a modest one-story house just outside of town, 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a shed out back where I could tinker. When I walked through it for the first time, I ran my hand along the wooden banister and whispered, "Mine." That single word felt heavier and sweeter than anything I'd said in years. I didn't buy fancy things. I bought peace, privacy, and a fresh start. Then, with the remaining money, I opened a small repair business, Ray's Handyman Services. I fixed what was broken, both in homes and in myself. Still, some nights, I'd catch myself thinking about Clarissa, wondering if she'd heard I'd left town or if she cared. Part of me wanted her to see that I'd landed on my feet, that I wasn't the burden she believed I was. But a bigger part of me wanted to stay invisible. Pride can be a quiet companion, but it keeps you upright. I didn't hate her. I hated the way she made me feel small, disposable. The way her mother's warnings had echoed louder in her mind than my love ever did. Every creak in my new house, every nail I hammered into the walls, was a reminder I had built this without her belief. Then, one night, months later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was trembling, fragile, and unmistakably hers. "Dad," she said softly. "It's me." I didn't speak right away. She went on, her words spilling out in bursts. Derek had cheated on her. When she confronted him, he'd hit her. Threw her things out. She was calling from a motel, crying so hard I could barely make out her sentences. "I didn't know who else to call," she said. "Please. I need help." I sat there in silence for a long moment. My hand trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the cruel irony of it all. She'd told me to forget she existed, yet here she was, reaching out from the wreckage of her own choices. I closed my eyes, remembering the sting of that night on her porch, and then I said quietly, "You can come here for now. Nothing more. No lectures. No revenge. Just this simple offer of shelter, because no matter how deep the wound, I wasn't the kind of man who left his own blood out in the cold." But as I hung up, I made myself a promise. I would help her, yes, but she would never again have the power to destroy me. And as the silence settled again, I realized something. Life had finally given me back control. But it came with a cost, the kind that only a father's heart truly understands. When Clarissa arrived at my new house, she stood at the door like a stranger who wasn't sure she was welcome. Her once bright eyes were swollen from crying, her clothes wrinkled, her hands trembling as she held a small duffel bag, the same kind I'd carried the day she threw me out. The irony wasn't lost on me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just looked at her, taking in the face that had grown older and harder since the last time I'd seen it. She used to look like her mother, soft features, kind eyes, but grief and pride had reshaped her into something else, something brittle. When I finally stepped aside, I didn't say a word. I just nodded toward the hallway. She took it as permission and walked in slowly, like she was afraid the floor might collapse beneath her. I'd prepared the guest room before she arrived. Fresh sheets, a lamp by the bedside, and a folded towel on the chair. I didn't do it for sentiment. I did it because decency doesn't disappear just because love has. When she saw it, she burst into tears again. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, clutching the doorway as though she might collapse. I didn't respond. I'd learned silence was sometimes the only armor I had left. "You can stay as long as you need," I said finally, my voice flat, even. "There's food in the fridge. The bathroom's down the hall." I left her there and walked outside, letting the cool night air hit my face. For a long time, I stood under the porch light, hands in my pockets, wondering if I'd done the right thing by opening my door again. The first few days were awkward. She moved around my house carefully, like she didn't want to touch anything that might belong to me. I caught her cleaning the kitchen one morning, humming quietly to herself. The sound was faint, but familiar. It reminded me of the mornings she used to sit at the table, eating cereal before school, humming the same tune. I almost said something, but I stopped myself. I didn't want her to mistake kindness for forgiveness. There's a difference between helping someone and letting them back into your heart. Every time I looked at her, I saw two versions of her. The little girl who used to run barefoot through the yard, and the grown woman who looked me in the eye and told me I no longer existed. The distance between those two people felt too wide to bridge. At night, I'd hear her crying through the thin wall between our rooms. Quiet sobs, muffled but persistent. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was remembering the same things I was. The smell of her mother's cooking, the laughter that used to fill our small apartment, the Christmas mornings when I pretend to be Santa just to see her smile. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but then I'd hear her whispering to herself, "I'm sorry," over and over. The words weren't meant for me, not yet. They were meant for her own guilt, and I let her have them. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived through. On the fifth night, she finally approached me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, pretending not to notice her pacing back and forth in the doorway. "Dad," she said softly. I looked up, waiting. I know I don't deserve to be here. What I did, what I said, it was unforgivable. Derek told me you'd said those things, and I believed him. I didn't even question it." Her voice cracked. "He made me think you were trying to take control of my life, that you wanted credit for everything I built." I set the paper down, folded neatly, and leaned back in my chair. "And you believed him," I said simply. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I was stupid. Because I wanted to prove I didn't need you." I sighed, the sound heavy, almost tired. "Clarissa, you didn't need to prove that. You've been independent your whole life. I raised you to be that way. But somewhere along the line, you confused independence with isolation." I stood, walking to the sink, filling my cup with water just to give my hands something to do. "You told me to forget you existed," I continued quietly. "Do you have any idea what those words do to a father?" She covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing openly now. "I didn't mean it," she whispered. I was angry. I looked at her then, really looked, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders trembling. "You meant it enough to say it," I replied. "And once words are spoken, they live somewhere permanent. You can't just pull them back when it suits you." The silence that followed was thick. She sat down slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I know," she said finally, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." I shook my head. Don't try to make it up. That's not how this works." She frowned, confused. "Then what do I do?" I took a deep breath, feeling the ache of years pressing against my ribs. "You heal. You move on. And you understand that while I'll always care about you, the version of me who lived for your approval doesn't exist anymore. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I'm waiting for you to love me again." She looked shattered, like she'd been holding on to the hope that my help was the first step toward reconciliation. But I had made peace with reality long before she called me. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust, that was gone for good. When she finally went to bed that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the empty cup in my hands. I realized then that this was what freedom looked like. It wasn't joy or revenge or triumph. It was calm. The kind of calm that only comes after every bridge has burned and you've learned to live with the smoke. A week later, Clarissa began helping out at my repair shop. She said she wanted to keep busy, to feel useful. I didn't stop her. Watching her sweep the floors and organize tools reminded me of when she was little, shadowing me as I fixed things around the house. Always curious. The sight should have softened me, but it didn't. Instead, it reminded me how time can twist everything. One afternoon, Leon stopped by to drop off some parts. He took one look at her, and then at me, raising an eyebrow. Didn't expect to see that, he muttered under his breath. I shrugged. Life's strange, I said. He nodded, studying me. You still angry? I thought about it for a moment, then said, not angry, just done. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stepped out into the yard. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the lawn. I looked at the house, the one I'd built from my own effort, from the ashes of everything I'd lost, and felt an odd sense of completion. Clarissa was safe, for now, but she was no longer my responsibility. She was a grown woman who had to live with the choices she'd made, the same way I had lived with mine. I whispered into the night, I'll help her stand, but she walks on her own. The words felt final, like drawing a quiet boundary around my heart. As I turned back toward the house, I realized something important. I no longer wanted her apology. I no longer needed it. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was peace. And for the first time in years, I had it, even if it came wrapped in silence. Clarissa fell into a routine, the way people do when they're trying to stitch their dignity back together with thread that's already fraying. She'd wake up early, usually before me, and start the coffee. I'd come into the kitchen to find her moving quietly, like a guest too ashamed to ask for more than she was already given. The smell of dark roast filled the air, and the sound of ceramic mugs on the counter echoed in a way that reminded me of better years. Mornings in our old apartment, when she was just a girl and her mother would laugh at something I said before she rushed off to work. But those memories felt far away now, like a movie I'd watched once and couldn't bear to revisit. Clarissa would smile when I walked in, soft and tentative, but I never smiled back. I nodded. I said good morning. And then I sat at the table and read the paper, keeping my wall firmly in place. She tried to reach through that wall in a dozen quiet ways. She offered to do my laundry. I let her. She organized the pantry and bought new dish towels from the store down the road. I didn't comment. She started showing up at the shop unannounced, always with a boxed lunch in hand, asking if I needed help. At first, I said no. Then I realized it was easier to let her stay busy than to have her hovering in the house all day, walking around like a ghost who hadn't figured out she was dead yet. So I told her she could sweep, wipe down counters, organize nails and screws, nothing more. She seemed grateful for even that. But there was still this current between us, this unspoken tension humming like a loose wire. Every moment felt like it could snap if one of us said the wrong thing. The confrontation came 2 weeks in, sooner than I expected, but not surprising. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. I was flipping through channels, not really watching anything, and she sat across from me, hands clenched in her lap. I could feel it coming, the way a man knows rain before the clouds even gather. Dad, she said, her voice too soft, can we talk? I muted the TV, but didn't look at her. We've been talking, I said flatly. No, she said, firmer now. I mean really talk. About what I said. About what I did. I turned to her slowly, setting the remote down. Her face was already red, eyes glistening. Go on, I said, crossing my arms. I wasn't angry. I was just ready. She took a shaky breath. I was wrong. I know that now. I was so wrapped up in my life with Derek, in the image we were trying to build, that I stopped seeing you as a person. I saw you as a problem, something that didn't fit into the picture we were painting. She paused, wiping her eyes. When he said you claimed ownership of the house, I didn't even question it. I just believed him, and I was looking for a reason to push you away. Her voice cracked. I thought I was being strong, setting boundaries. But I was cruel. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stared at her for a long time, long enough for her to start shifting uncomfortably under the weight of it. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Do you remember what you said to me, standing on that porch? Her eyes dropped. Yes, she whispered. Say it, I told her. She looked up, her lip trembling. I said, go and don't return. You can forget about my existence. The words hung there like smoke. I nodded. And I did, I said. I took you at your word. I left with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. You said I no longer existed to you, and I made peace with that. Now you're here, and I helped you because it's what decent people do. But don't mistake that for some grand reconciliation. I'm not your father the way I was before. That man died the night you threw him out. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked like someone who'd been slapped, her face flushed and stunned. You don't mean that, she said quietly. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. I mean every word, I said, turning back to her. I fed you. I gave you a roof. I made sure you were safe. But you don't get access to my life anymore. You don't get to be in my plans, my dreams, my legacy. You're a guest here, not family. You made that choice. And now, so have I. She cried then, full body sobs that shook her shoulders and made her fold in on herself. It should have moved me. It didn't. I'd spent too many nights in Leon's garage, freezing in silence, replaying her words over and over like a song I couldn't stop. I'd built this new life brick by brick, alone. I didn't build it for her. She was a memory now, and memories don't get a second chance at rewriting themselves just because they finally regret being what they are. Later that night, Leon came by with a six-pack and his usual half-grunt of a greeting. We sat out back while Clarissa stayed in her room. I told him what happened. He didn't say much, just sipped his beer and watched the stars. Then he muttered, "You're a better man than me." I'd have slammed the door in her face. I shook my head. "No, you wouldn't," I said. "You'd have done the same. You just wouldn't let it cut you as deep." He chuckled. "Maybe. But cutting deep don't make you noble, Ray. It just makes you bleed more." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the same way I had in Leon's garage. The difference now was that I had walls around me that were mine. I wasn't cold. I wasn't begging for space. But I was still hurting. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a slow, grinding process, like sanding down splinters embedded deep in bone. And some wounds you learn to live with, not because they heal, but because you can't afford to keep picking at them. The next morning, Clarissa left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for everything. I'll be out of your way soon. I understand." I stared at it for a while, then folded it neatly and slid it into the drawer where I kept receipts and warranties. Not because it meant anything, but because I wanted to remember that she finally heard me. And that mattered more than anything she could have said. Clarissa didn't leave right away. She stayed another week, maybe out of fear, maybe out of habit, but I said nothing either way. We existed in this strange, tense rhythm. Two people under one roof, sharing space but not lives. She kept busy, almost obsessively so. One morning I came home from the shop to find the shed had been swept out and reorganized, the tools arranged neatly on the wall with little labels under each one. She was trying, I could see that. But trying doesn't always translate to fixing. Every act of kindness she performed felt like an apology she couldn't bring herself to say again. And I wasn't in the business of making it easier. Some bridges stay broken for a reason. Word got around town faster than I expected. It always does in small places. People who had barely acknowledged my existence before the lottery when suddenly had an interest in my family situation. I'd hear whispers at the hardware store or notice someone glance too long at Clarissa when she came with me to pick up supplies. "Is that Ray's daughter?" someone muttered under their breath one afternoon. "Didn't she throw him out once?" Gossip has a way of staining even the cleanest efforts. I didn't defend her, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I had nothing left in me to offer explanations. The truth didn't need a stage. It lived quietly in my home, in my silence, in the line I had drawn between help and healing. Leon called it my charity project, though not unkindly. "You've always had a soft spot, Ray," he said one evening as we sipped coffee on my porch. "But don't confuse compassion with responsibility." She made her bed. "You just gave her a blanket." I knew what he meant. Clarissa's presence was temporary, like winter, the kind you endure because you must, not because you want it. She wasn't mooching or acting entitled. In fact, she kept to herself more and more as the days passed. But every shared meal, every polite smile, carried the weight of history neither of us knew how to carry without dropping it on each other's toes. One night, she came into the living room while I was watching the evening news. She stood for a moment, then sat on the edge of the armchair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "I found a small apartment," she said, voice low. "It's nothing much, but it's clean and close to town. I can move in next week." I nodded without looking away from the TV. "That's good," I said. "Sounds like a fresh start." She hesitated, then added, "I used some of the money you gave me. I hope that's okay." I turned to her then. "It's yours," I said. "I didn't give it with strings." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she just nodded and walked away. Later that week, she moved out. No fanfare, no tears, just a quiet goodbye and a box of her things carried out to a small, beat-up sedan she must have borrowed or bought cheap. I helped her load it without speaking much. When she closed the trunk, she turned to me and said, "I know this doesn't fix anything. I just wanted you to know. I'm trying to be better." I nodded. Trying's a good place to start. She looked like she wanted a hug, some sign that the door wasn't completely shut, but I kept my arms at my sides. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't open. Not to her. Not yet. The house felt quieter after she left. Not empty, just still. I found myself waking up at the same time, walking past her empty room like it was a museum exhibit of a chapter one didn't want to revisit. I thought I'd feel relief, and in some ways I did. But there was also this strange hollowness, like something unresolved had moved out but left its shadow behind. I went back to work full-time at the shop, buried myself in projects. Fixed a few broken fences, rewired a porch light, replaced a rotting stairwell. Fixing things felt good. Things don't talk back. Things don't betray you. About a week after Clarissa left, I ran into her ex-husband, Derek, at the gas station. He was standing by the pump, jaw set like he was still king of some imaginary castle. When he saw me, his smile was smug. "Well, look who hit the jackpot," he said, tipping his head toward my truck. "Guess even deadbeat dads get lucky sometimes." I didn't rise to it. I just stared at him. But something in my silence must have unnerved him, because he added, "She came crawling back to you, didn't she? Told me she would." I stepped forward, just enough to close the space. "She didn't crawl," I said calmly. "She broke. And unlike you, I don't kick people when they're down." He blinked, unsure how to respond. I walked away, started the engine, and didn't look back. That was the last time I ever saw him. That night, I got a call from Clarissa. Not crying, not begging, just checking in. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for not letting me fall all the way." I listened, let her speak, but I kept my words measured. "I didn't do it for thanks," I said. "I did it because I can sleep at night knowing I did what was right." She was quiet for a long time, then said, Do you think someday we'll be okay?" I didn't answer right away. "Maybe," I said at last. "But okay doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward separately, without hate." She exhaled, like that answer was more merciful than she expected. And maybe it was. When I hung up, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of a house that was finally mine. I had built this life out of the ruins of rejection, out of bitterness that didn't rot me but fueled me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And piece by piece, I was building it, on my terms, with the dignity I'd been denied when I was cast out by blood. The line had been drawn. I had helped her, yes, but she no longer had a claim to anything beyond that. She was not in my will, not in my retirement plan, not in the spare key under the mat. That version of our bond had died the day she believed a man who'd never earned her trust over the one who gave her his whole life. And some truths, once realized, become the foundations of freedom. I wasn't cruel. I was clear. That was the difference. And finally, I could breathe again. A few months passed after Clarissa moved out, and the quiet in my house settled into something more than silence. It became peace. Not the kind you declare with grand gestures or announce to anyone who will listen, but the slow, steady calm that seeps into your bones after the noise has stopped. My days were filled with the hum of work, repairs, service calls, replacing broken hinges, fixing wobbly stair railings. And in that labor, I found something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. My business was small, but it was mine, And every time I turned a broken thing into something whole again, I reminded myself that people, unlike furniture or wiring, didn't always get that luxury. Then, one morning, I got a letter in the mail, not a bill or a flyer, but a real letter in handwriting I hadn't seen since Clarissa was a teenager. The envelope was plain, no return address, and my name was written in soft, careful cursive, like she wasn't sure if I'd even open it. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I tore it open. The letter wasn't long. She wrote about how she was doing, her job at a local diner, the studio apartment she'd furnished with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, and how she joined a support group for women who had been through abusive relationships. She said she was learning to forgive herself, not just for what happened with Derek, but for what she'd done to me. She didn't ask for anything. That was the part that struck me the most. There were no veiled requests, no emotional hooks. Just an update, a thank you, and one final line. I know I can't ask for space in your heart again, but I hope I can earn space in your prayers. I read that line 3 times, then folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the note she'd left the morning she moved out. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because some messages are meant to sit in silence. That was my boundary. I wouldn't reopen the door just because she knocked softly. I'd already built too much behind it. The weeks that followed were uneventful in the best way. I drank my coffee on the porch every morning, fixed a broken water heater for a single mom who couldn't afford a plumber, and helped Leon replace the roof on his shed. The work was steady, and the solitude was healing. People in town talked less about me now, or maybe I just stopped noticing. I had become, once again, a quiet man in a quiet town, just how I liked it. The lottery win was no longer a rumor or a headline. It was just part of my past. I never flaunted it. I used it to buy freedom, not attention. One Saturday, while I was restocking supplies in the shop, a woman came in, early 30s, brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, carrying a laundry basket with a broken handle. She looked around like she didn't belong in a place filled with hammers and dust. "Are you Ray?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled nervously. "Your daughter said you might be able to help." I blinked. "My daughter?" She nodded. "Clarissa. I met her at the support group. She said you fix things without asking for anything in return." That line hit me harder than I expected. I took the basket from her hands and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I do." After she left, I sat in the shop alone for a while, the smell of sawdust thick in the air. I thought about the kind of person Clarissa was trying to become. The fact that she was talking about me, without bitterness, without lies, meant something. It didn't fix anything between us, but it showed me that maybe the version of her I raised wasn't completely gone. Maybe she'd just gotten lost for a while. And maybe, in her own way, she was trying to find her way back, not to me, but to herself. That, I could respect. Leon and I went fishing that weekend, something we hadn't done in years. He brought his old cooler full of beer and sandwiches, and we sat by the lake casting lines into the still water. "You seem lighter these days," he said after a while. "Like the weight ain't choking you anymore." I nodded. "It's because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine," I said. "Clarissa's choices, her pain, her regret, they're hers now, not mine." He chuckled. "That's the thing about kids. They think you're a net, there to catch them every time. But sometimes, letting them fall is the only way they learn how to stand." We stayed there until the sun dipped low, painting the lake in gold and orange. I didn't say much more, but I thought a lot. About forgiveness. About the difference between giving someone a place to rest and giving them a place in your life. Clarissa had rested. She'd stood back up, and she'd walked away on her own 2 feet. That was enough. More than enough. A few days later, I updated my will. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I left most of what I owned to local charities, my shop to Leon's grandson who had a knack for tools, and a small fund to a women's shelter Clarissa once mentioned in her letter. It wasn't revenge. It was choice. My legacy would be built on what I believed in: kindness, hard work, and boundaries. And I knew, without doubt, that my daughter's story with me had reached its final chapter. I didn't erase her from my memory. I didn't burn the photos or tear up the notes. But I didn't invite her back into the story either. Some reunions only exist in imagination. Some broken things are never meant to be fixed, not out of anger, but because they no longer serve the lives we're building. And that's okay. On the anniversary of the day she threw me out, I stood on my own porch, this time with my head held high, a warm cup of coffee in hand, and no weight on my shoulders. I looked out at the sunrise, the sky slowly bleeding from deep blue to soft amber, and whispered to the wind, I gave her life twice. But the second time, I didn't have to die for it. That was enough. That was peace. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come not from enemies, but from the people we once gave everything to. This was a story of survival, of rebuilding from nothing, and of setting boundaries even when it breaks your heart. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved just to protect your peace, let us know in the comments how you found the strength. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience, family, and the power of saying enough. See you soon in the next one.